There are 27 new cards in Innistrad Crimson Vow. We're going to go over every single one of them right now. This is the one, James, and you're watching the newest 27 cards in Crimson Vow. First, we're starting with Savior of Allenbach. We have a 1 and 2 white creature with a new mechanic called Training. That is, whenever this creature attacks with another creature with greater power, put a +1/+1 counter on this creature. Now, this is the opposite. If you watched my YouTube video before, I talked about what mechanics could be in this set. This one is the reverse or the mirror of the Mentor mechanic. If you're familiar with the Mentor mechanic, it is basically just this Training, but the opposite. Attack with this and something with greater power, and this gets a +1/+1 counter. Whenever Savior of Allenbach trains, exile up to one other target creature from the battlefield or creature card from a graveyard. When a Savior of Allenbach leaves the battlefield, put the exiled cards onto the battlefield under their owner's control. So this is your typical Skyclave Apparition type card, but this card is also 3 mana and takes up the slot of Skyclave Apparition, so I don't know how playable this card is going to be, but this card is a mythic rare, so maybe there's a little bit more to this card than meets the eye. Next card is Overcharged Amalgam. I think this card's very strong. It's 2 and 2 blue for a 3/3 rare zombie horror with flash and flying. Dimir Flash, anybody? I know this isn't a rogue, but Dimir Rogues? It has a new mechanic called Exploit. Actually, it's a reprint mechanic. This mechanic was in a past set as well. But when this creature enters the battlefield, you may sacrifice a creature. When Overcharged Amalgam exploits a creature, counter target spell, activated ability, or triggered ability. So this is a very powerful effect, and it reminds me a little bit of the 4-mana Simic one that comes down and counters the spell. Now, this card, you do have to sacrifice a creature, but there's a lot of different things you can do with Decayed Zombies in this set, and different really small creatures you can sacrifice, like a Shambling Ghast or something like that in Standard. I think this card might have an actual slot. It's a 4-mana 3/3 Flash Flyer, keep in mind. So I think this card's very powerful with this new exploit mechanic. We have Soaring the Mirthless. I almost called it Soaring the Masterless, but Soaring the Mirthless, I think, is one of the most powerful cards in the set. It's 2 and 2 black, 4-mana Planeswalker, starts on 4 loyalty. Its +1 is look at the top card of your library. You may reveal that card and put it into your hand. So it draws a card, technically gets around Narset, Parter of Veils. If you do, you lose life equal to its mana value. So notably, you can reveal it and put it in your hand. So you don't have to draw it if it's like a 6-mana creature, right? Or a 6-mana card. Its -2 is create a 2/3 black vampire creature token with flying and lifelink. That is huge. The last time a Planeswalker made a 2/3 was 5-mana Ashiok, and that's a 5-mana Planeswalker. This makes a 2/3 with flying and lifelink, which does also offset the +1 if you lose life from that. It's -7, Soaring the Mirthless, deals 13 damage to any target. You gain 13 life. So basically, you win the game, you attack them with your 2/3 flying lifelinks, and then you -13 and kill them. So this card's very, very, very powerful. It's also 4 mana. Usually you see cards with +1s that draw a card with 5-mana Planeswalkers. That's why I think this card is very strong, because it is 4 mana. Moving on to Olivia, Rimson Bride, which is one of the feature cards in Crimson Vow, is a 6-mana Rakdos, 3/4 with flying and haste. Whenever Olivia Crimson Bride attacks, return target creature card from your graveyard to the battlefield tapped and attacking. It gains when you don't control a legendary vampire, exile this creature. So maybe we see some standard or historic, or maybe even modern, reanimate strategies that brings this out, and something else attacking that does some kind of thing that I'm not thinking of. But Reanimator card, for sure. It is 6 mana, so I'm not sure of the competitive viability of this card in Standard, but it is really sweet. It's only a 3/4, so it does die to, Demon Bolt and things that people are playing right now. So it's a little bit lower on my radar, but it definitely has a chance to be good. I'm not saying it's terrible right now, but it's here. Olivia is here in Standard. Moving on to Dig Up. It's a green 1-drop sorcery with Cleave. Before I read Cleave, I'm going to read the card. Search your library for a basic land card, reveal it, put it in your hand, then shuffle. You're asking yourself, why is there brackets? I'm going to tell you the Cleave mechanic deals with brackets. Cleave, for 1 black, black, green, You may cast this spell for its cleave cost, so 4 mana. If you do, remove the words in square brackets. So it turns search a land, reveal it, put it in your hand and shuffle, to search your library for a card, put it into your hand, then shuffle. So literally Demonic Tutor for 4 mana. Take that as you wish. It might be a little bit too slow for standard, but it's probably really good for commander if you're into that type of thing. Moving on to Wedding Announcement. I'm actually really excited for this card. The 2 and a white enchantment. At the beginning of your end step, put an invitation counter on Wedding Announcement. If you attack with 2 or more creatures this turn, draw a card. White has draw power. Otherwise, create a 1/1 white human creature token. Then if Wedding Announcement has 3 or more invitation counters on it, transform it. And the transform side, as you see here, is an enchantment that says creatures you control get +1/+1, so a traditional Lord enchantment. Now, I'm excited about this card because not only is it a Lord, but the problem with Lord enchantments is that they don't actually contribute to the board in any way, and this card does make 1/1s. If you can play this on an empty board, make a 1/1, and the next turn make a 1/1, and then the next turn attack with next turn make a 1/1 and like cast a creature, and then attack with 3. It says 2 or more, so you could just attack with the 2 1/1s. You still get to draw a card, and then you also get to transform this in the same turn. So I think this card is really, really good and a little bit underrated. I haven't heard people talking about this card, but I think this card's really good. Moving on to Glanoch the Omnivore. It's a 4 mana 3/3 legendary creature frog. Whenever a frog you control attacks, mill 3 cards. Now, there's a lot of shapeshifters and things in this format, so maybe you can build a frog tribal deck, but you are milling your deck. Whenever a permanent card is put into your graveyard from your library, exile it with a croak counter on it. That includes lands. You may play lands and cast spells from among cards you own in exile with croak counters on them. So you play this card on turn 4. You mill some cards. Say you mill a land or some other permanent card. The next turn you get to just play the cards. So it is card advantage. It's a little bit slow, but say on turn 5 you haven't played your land drop yet. You play this card, attack with whatever other frog you have, shapeshifter, right? And then you can mill into a land, exile with a croak counter on it, and then play that land as your 5th land drop. You can do things like that, or you can just play a whole bunch of shapeshifters for frog tribal if you'd like. Moving on to Jay Made of Dishonor. It's a 4 mana 4/5 vampire. It's a rare. 4 mana 4/5 is a pretty good stat line. Let's read what it does. Whenever Jay Made of Dishonor and or 1 or more other vampires enter the battlefield under your control, create a blood token. This ability triggers only once each turn. A blood token is an artifact with pay 1 and tap it and discard a card. Sacrifice this artifact, draw a card. So it's a rummage artifact. You can pay 2 and sacrifice another creature or a blood token. Each opponent loses 2 life and you gain 2 life. So this seems like one of those cards that like seems really good on the outset, and you want to put this in your deck, but it might not make the cut because it doesn't really interact with the board in any way. But it does create virtual card advantage and looting and killing your opponent. So I mean, you can give it like a Rakdos vampire deck with this as the top end to kind of close the game. But this card is, I would say this card's pretty average, but we'll see. I could be wrong. Moving on to Demonic Bargain. This might be the most interesting card in the set. There's a lot more interesting cards to go, so make sure to keep watching if you'd like, and hit the like button if you like more things like this. I'll be making more videos as new spoilers come out. Demonic Bargain is a 2 and a black sorcery. Exile the top 13 cards of your library, then search your library for a card. Put that card into your hand, then shuffle. Now, this is a scary card, but it's also good. It's also kind of slow, though. You guaranteed get a card, but only if you don't exile it first with the top 13 cards, and 13 cards is a lot. It's almost a third of your entire deck. So, I mean, if you're in the bargaining gambling mood, then this will be a good card. Maybe it's good in Commander. Maybe you don't exile the top 13. Maybe you're in the gambling spirit. Tell me what you think about this card. Moving on to By Invitation Only. This is actually one of the more interesting cards as well. It's a 5 mana sorcery. Choose a number between 0 and 13. Each player sacrifices that many creatures. Now, you don't usually see this in white. Usually it's exile or destroy. But this says that each player sacrifices, which is interesting. And it's 5 mana. So usually when you're playing a card like this, you're not going to be playing creatures anyways. So it does get around indestructible, which is nice. So you can just pay 5 mana and call the number 13, and then you just have your opponent sacrifice their board, which could be actually better than something like Wrath of God. Maybe you play one or two of these in the sideboard in Historic, or maybe even in Standard, and get around cards that can't be destroyed, like a Gargantua Vanguard. So, very interesting card, I must say. And actually might see some playability. Moving on to Massive Might, it's a 1-mana instant. Target creature gets +2/+2 and gains trample till end of turn. This might be just a draft card, but Massive Might does give the creature trample. So if you play draft or play limited, this card could come up, definitely come up. Moving on to Fel Stinger, is a 2 and a black for a 3/2 Death Touch with Exploit. Whenever this creature enters the battlefield, you may sacrifice a creature, and then when you exploit a creature with this card, target player draws 2 cards and loses 2 life. So I guess if they're at 2 life, you can kill them, or 2 or less, or you could just draw 2 and gain 2. This card reminds me of Skullport Merchant. I think Skullport Merchant might be a little bit better than this card, but this card does give you that instant gratification of drawing 2 cards instead of having to soak 4 mana into drawing the 2. So this could see play in a black-based mid-range deck, or maybe even mono-black snow. Moving on to Dorothea, Vengeful Victim, is a Azorius 4/4 flyer. When it attacks or blocks, sacrifice it at the end of combat. It has Disturb for 3. You may cast this card from your graveyard transformed for its Disturb cost. And it does transform. I don't have the actual transform right now. Can't see the other side. I believe it is a 2/2 blocker, but I'll have to double check it. I actually don't have that right now. But being a 2-mana 4/4 flyer, and you sacrifice at end of combat, you could actually do some cool things with sacrificing this card if you have to block with it or attack with it for a 4/4 flyer. It's actually just insane for a 2-mana card. Play it on 2, making a nice early blocker, or deal 4 to them and then sacrifice this card. It's going to sacrifice itself anyway. It apparently is a Saint Traft enchantment on the Disturb side. This card is definitely very interesting. It might not be good at all, but it's good to mess around with for sure. The Aura on the other side makes a 4/4 flying token that's attacking and sacks end of turn on the backside. So we got confirmation on that. All right, moving on to Thalia, Guardian of Thraben. Now this is a card that we can either all be waiting for, or it's the doom of your existence. Either you love this card or you hate it. There's probably not much in between. It's a reprint. It's a 2-mana 2/1. It has first strike, and non-creature spells cost 1 more to cast. So hopefully this makes mono white or white-based mid-range decks or aggro decks better against all runs Epiphany and Standard. Now, moving on to Sagarta Summons. It's a 4 and 2 white 6-mana enchantment. Creatures you control with +1/+1 counters on them have base power and toughness 4/4, have flying, and are angels in addition to their other types. I don't see this card seeing much play in Standard, but in Commander, all angel players rise up. Moving on to Valderran, Bloodcaster. This is a flip card. It's a 2-mana 2/1 with flying. It's a rare. Whenever Valderran, Bloodcaster, or another non-token creature you control dies, create a blood token. And as we know, it's an artifact with you can pay 1 and tap it, discard a card, and draw a card. Whenever you create a blood token, if you control 5 or more blood tokens, transform Valderran, Bloodcaster. It transforms into a 3/3 flyer at the beginning of combat. On your turn, up to 1 target blood token you control becomes a 2/2 black bat creature creature with flying and haste in addition to its other types. So you just make a bunch of blood tokens and turn them into other 2/2s. So this could be a late game. This could be a really good card in the late game if you just draw it off the top, and also is a pretty good card to play on turn 2 as a 2/1 flyer if you're playing a vampire deck or wizard deck. So I think this card has a lot of potential. I don't know how many blood counters or blood tokens that are going to be able to be made. From what I've seen so far in the set, blood tokens are only able to be made like once a turn, a couple times a turn. But maybe there's a card or so that comes out in the set that makes a bunch of blood tokens that can really utilize this card. This card has high potential. Moving on to Rot-Tide Gargantua. It's a 5-mana 5/4 with exploit, and as we know, when it enters the battlefield, you can sacrifice a creature. When Rot-Tide Gargantua exploits a creature, each opponent sacrifices a creature. So this kind of reminds me of some limited cards that are really good in the past, and this is a common, so we're going to be seeing that a lot in limited if you're a limited player, and I think it's actually a really good card. Moving on to Weary Prisoner. It's a 3 and a red for a 2/6 defender with Daybound. That's it. Moving on to if it's nighttime, it becomes a Wrathful Jailbreaker, and if you're unfamiliar with the day-night mechanic, if you cast 2 spells in a turn, it becomes day on the next upkeep. If any player doesn't cast any spells during their turn, it becomes nighttime on the next person's upkeep. And when it becomes nighttime, it transforms into Wrathful Jailbreaker. and it attacks each combat if able as a 6/6, and it of course has Nightbound. And then of course, when you cast 2 spells on the next upkeep, it becomes Weary Prisoner again. But a 4 mana 6/6 with Nightbound, probably really good in limited. Moving on to Gluttonous Guest. It's a 2 and a black for a 1/4 vampire. When Gluttonous Guest enters the battlefield, create a blood token. So maybe you could play this in your blood token vampire deck to start making that 2/2 into a 3/3 and start pumping up the jam with vampires. Whenever you sacrifice a blood token, you gain a life. So this kind of, it's cool because Gluttonous Guest gains life by drinking wine, or drinking blood wine, I guess I should say. But this card, I don't know if this card will see play in Standard. Maybe there's a Standard Vampires deck that maybe plays a couple of these. But I don't think this card is necessarily terrible, but it's pretty good in limited. Apprentice Sharpshooter, 2 and a green for a 1/4 Reacher with training. And as we know, if at the beginning of the video here, whenever this creature attacks with another creature with greater power, put a +1/+1 counter on this creature. Now, usually 1/4 Reachers for 3 is like pretty good in limited. You need to block those flyers. But just the fact that this card can actually get +1/+1 counters on it makes this really good in limited as well. I don't see this being played in Standard, but here's the card, Apprentice Sharpshooter. We have Griffrider is a 3 mana 3/1 flyer with training. Nothing really more to say about this card, but it is a 3 mana 2/1 flyer that can get bigger, which is very, very good. Moving on to Valderran Estate. Now this starts the land cycle. Valderran Estate is a land that you can tap it to add a colorless mana. You can tap it and pay a life to add a mana of any color, but you can only spend it to cast a vampire. So very, very good in vampires, notably does not come in tapped. You can pay 5 and tap it to create a blood token. This ability costs 1 less to activate for each vampire you control. It's an artifact with 1 and tap it, discard a card, sacrifice the artifact, and draw a card. So say you have 3 vampires on the battlefield, notably you can pay a life to spend it to do a mana of any color for this. So you can play like 3 color vampires, or maybe even just red-black and use this as fixing, which is very, very powerful, especially coming as an untapped land in Standard. Now, you can use this to make a bunch of blood tokens eventually. The mana cost to use this ability becomes less, and then maybe there is a world where we can play that 2 mana 2/1 and start making a bunch of other 2/2s. And maybe there's something there, is what I'm saying. Maybe there's something there. Moving on to Shattered Sanctum. We are getting the rest of the slow lands. Everybody clap. All right, rest of the slow lands we are getting. Shattered Sanctum is the Orzhov one. Dreamroot Cascade is the Cynic one. Deathcap Glade is the Golgari one. Sundown Pass Boros. And Storm-Carved Coast is Izzet. The last thing we needed is for Izzet to get a better mana base, and good luck playing all runs Epiphany decks. See you in the next video.